December 19th, 1778. Versailles. Marie Antoinette is dying. Not from disease or poison, from childbirth. But here's the part that'll mess with your head. She's not alone with doctors and midwives. 200 people are packed into her bedroom, courtiers climbing on furniture to get a better view. The air so thick with body heat that windows have to be smashed open when she collapses unconscious. She doesn't even learn if her baby's a boy or girl for over an hour because she's passed out from lack of oxygen. This wasn't medieval barbarism. This was Tuesday in 18th century France. Welcome to Hearts and History. I'm about to tell you one of the most disturbing stories in royal history, and trust me, you're going to need to sit down for this one. Get comfortable, maybe grab some tea, because we're diving deep into why queens couldn't even give birth without an audience. If you're new here, hit subscribe. I love these late night history sessions with you all. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I'm always curious about my fellow night owl history lovers scattered across the globe right now. The crown of motherhood. Here's what nobody tells you about being a queen. Your body doesn't belong to you. Your womb? That's state property. Marie Antoinette learned this the hard way on that freezing December night. She'd been trying to get pregnant for 8 years. 8 years of French courtiers whispering about her fertility, her worth, her ability to secure the succession. When she finally goes into labour, it's not a private moment between her and trusted attendants. It's theatre, political theatre with life and death stakes for everyone involved. See, this whole public birth thing wasn't some weird French quirk. This was standard operating procedure across European monarchies, and it existed for one terrifying reason: baby swapping. Sounds crazy, right? But in 1688, when England's Catholic Queen Mary gave birth to a son, Protestant nobles immediately claimed the baby was fake. Smuggled in through a warming pan, they said. Those rumours helped trigger the Glorious Revolution that same year. One birth, one set of conspiracy theories, and boom, a king loses his throne. That's why witnesses mattered. That's why privacy was impossible. Louis XIV made it official policy. Every French queen, every princess of royal blood, had to deliver in front of witnesses. His logic was brutally simple. With dozens of reliable people watching, nobody could later claim the child was illegitimate. The birth belonged to France, not the mother. The French people, represented by their nobles, had a right to witness the creation of their future ruler. Marie Antoinette's body, like every queen's body, was an instrument of state policy. Privacy was for commoners. Royal wombs were public business and public entertainment. The preparations were insane. Weeks before delivery, Marie Antoinette entered confinement. Male servants dismissed, communion taken, farewell ceremonies held. Her birthing chamber at Versailles was draped with heavy tapestries to keep warm and create sacred space. But it also had to accommodate crowds. When her physician announced the Queen is going to give birth, it was like opening floodgates. Courtiers, nobles, ministers, officials, they all came running. Picture Black Friday shoppers rushing toward a sale, except they're rushing to watch a woman suffer through the most vulnerable moment of her life. The press was unbelievable. An eyewitness wrote that Marie Antoinette was actually in danger of her life from the crowd. People climbed on chairs, stood on tables, pushed and shoved for better views. The room was sealed shut, windows covered with tapestries for warmth. 200 bodies packed together, breathing the same air, generating heat. The fireplace blazing. Nobody could open windows because the Queen needed warmth. Think about that. She's labouring in what's basically a medieval sauna, filled with excited spectators, treating her agony like entertainment. Then the baby comes. A daughter, Marie Therese. And immediately, Marie Antoinette collapses. Face purple, jaw clenched, completely unconscious. Everyone thinks she's dead. Courtiers start screaming, running toward her. Louis XVI himself, smashes the windows with his bare hands, cutting himself on glass, desperate to get cold air into the room. They bring boiling water for her feet, perform bloodletting. She's out for so long that when she finally wakes up, she has no idea what gender her baby is. Over an hour of unconsciousness, because tradition demanded witnesses. Louis was so horrified by his wife's near death that he changed the protocol. Future births still had witnesses, but fewer, maybe a dozen trusted officials, instead of 200 random courtiers. But even that shows how persistent this practice was. No matter how traumatic, witnesses remained essential. Queens weren't just dealing with the agony of 18th century childbirth, which killed enormous numbers of women. They were performing for an audience that judged their screams, their blood, their body's most intimate functions. Too much screaming? Undignified. Baby's a girl? Failure. Political pressure during the worst physical pain imaginable. Elisabeth Charlotte, another French royal, wrote about her witnessed birth in the 1670s. To give birth before so many people, to know they are counting your pains, judging whether you bear them well or poorly, discussing your body as if you were a broodmare, I would rather have died. That's the psychological torture these women endured. Catherine de' Medici suffered through multiple public births, desperately trying to produce surviving male heirs, while courtiers speculated about her fertility and whether the king should consider other options. Imagine recovering from miscarriage while nobles debate your replacement. The practice started declining in the late 1700s, partly because of trauma like Marie Antoinette's, partly because Enlightenment ideas about human dignity were spreading. But it persisted longer than you'd think. When Queen Elizabeth II was born in 1926, the British Home Secretary still had to verify the birth, waiting in an adjacent room. The practice finally ended in 1948, before Prince Charles was born. It took until the mid-20th century for royal women to gain the same birthing privacy that common women had always enjoyed. 3 centuries of public suffering for political theatre. Conception of deception. June 10th, 1688. St. James's Palace, London. Queen Mary of Modena is in labour. But here's what makes this birth different. 41 witnesses are crammed into her bedchamber. Bishops, nobles, ministers, all watching, all waiting, and when that baby boy finally arrives, half of England immediately calls him a fake. A warming pan baby, they whisper. An imposter smuggled in during the chaos. These aren't random accusations. This is calculated political warfare, and it's about to bring down a king. The rumours start spreading within hours. Protestant pamphleteers flood London with accusations. The real baby died, they claim. Mary switched him out, or maybe there never was a baby at all. Just an actor planted in the bedclothes. Sounds insane, right? But remember, this Catholic baby boy just became heir to England's throne. And Protestant England, they're not having it. By December, King James II is fleeing to France. The Glorious Revolution has begun, all because of childbirth rumours. Here's what gets me about this story. 41 witnesses saw that birth happen. 41. The king was there, the Queen's own mother, bishops who'd sworn oaths to God. But it didn't matter. People believed what they wanted to believe. Because in 1688, seeing wasn't believing, politics was believing. And those witnesses, they became pawns in a game bigger than any of them understood. Their testimonies were dissected, published, twisted. Some stood firm. Others started questioning what they'd actually seen. Let's back up. How did witnessed royal births even become a thing? We're talking about Louis XIV here, the Sun King, 1660s France. His mother, Anne of Austria, had given birth publicly, and Louis decided this needs to be official policy, not just for queens, but for all royal women. His reasoning was brutally simple. If dozens of people watch the baby come out, nobody can claim it's fake later. The birth of an heir belongs to France, not to the mother. Think about the paranoia driving this decision. Every royal pregnancy was a potential conspiracy. What if the Queen miscarried and covered it up? What if she had a girl but presented a boy? What if the baby died and got replaced? These weren't theoretical fears. Succession disputes had torn Europe apart for centuries. Wars, thousands dead, all because someone questioned whether a bear was legitimate. Louis XIV looked at this chaos and thought, witnesses, lots of them, problem solved. But here's the twisted part. The more witnesses you have, the more complicated the truth becomes. Mary of Modena's birth had 41 witnesses, right? But when investigators started questioning them afterward, their stories didn't quite match. Some saw the baby emerge, others just heard sounds behind the bed curtains. A few admitted they were focused on the Queen's face, not the business end. Suddenly, 41 witnesses became 41 slightly different versions of the same event. The Protestant investigators pounced on every inconsistency. Why were the bed curtains partially closed? Why didn't everyone see the exact moment of birth? Where exactly was each witness standing? They published detailed interrogations, treating these nobles like criminal suspects. And slowly, doubt crept in. Even some witnesses started second-guessing themselves. Had they really seen what they thought they saw? The supposed solution to royal legitimacy questions had created even more questions. This is where the deception gets layered. Because Mary of Modena's baby was legitimate. Modern historians agree on this. But the Protestant opposition needed him to be fake, so they made him fake through repetition, through pamphlets, through carefully crafted doubt. They turned witnesses into unreliable narrators of their own experience. It wasn't about what actually happened in that room. It was about controlling the story of what happened. And stories, once they take hold, become more powerful than facts. The baby at the centre of all this. James Francis Edward Stuart. He grew up in French exile, knowing half of England considered him an imposter. Imagine that psychological burden, your entire identity questioned because of your birth circumstances. He spent decades trying to reclaim a throne that many believed he never legitimately held. The old pretender, they called him. That warming pan baby rumour followed him to his grave. Witnessed birth was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of doubt. Here's what Louis XIV didn't anticipate. Witnesses could be corrupted. Their memories could be questioned. Their motives could be attacked. Political opponents could always find ways to cast doubt, no matter how many people were in that room. The supposed foolproof system had a fatal flaw. It assumed people would accept witness testimony when it contradicted their political interests. But when the stakes are kingdoms and religious wars, nobody accepts anything at face value. Truth becomes negotiable. So witnessed birth created this impossible situation. Queens laboured in rooms packed with strangers, their most vulnerable moments turned into political theatre. But even with all those eyes watching, doubt still crept in. Rumours still spread. Revolution still happened. The system designed to eliminate questions about royal legitimacy just created different questions, more complex ones. Because when you turn childbirth into a public performance, you're not guaranteeing truth, you're just guaranteeing that everyone has an opinion about what they think they saw. Rigorous rituals. Here's what gets me about royal births. It wasn't just the day itself that was completely insane. The whole thing started weeks earlier. When a queen got pregnant, she didn't just wait around like normal people. Oh no, she had to follow this elaborate ritual called lying in or taking to her chamber. Think house arrest, but fancier. And it could last for weeks. The queen would basically disappear from public life, entering what historian Sarah Gristwood calls a world of women. This wasn't just pregnancy leave. This was a complete transformation of the Queen's existence. Male servants were dismissed. Even male food servers were banned. Women took over everything: cooking, cleaning, attending the Queen, even standing guard at the chamber door. The Queen would have a formal farewell ceremony with her male attendants, take communion, then essentially vanish into this female-only bubble. No men allowed except doctors, when absolutely necessary, and the king, he waited outside like everyone else. But here's where it gets really intense. The birthing chamber itself was prepared like some kind of sacred temple. Heavy tapestries covered every wall, thick curtains blocked the windows, everything designed to keep the space warm, which sounds nice until you realize what's coming next. They're creating this enclosed, suffocating environment that's about to be packed with hundreds of people. The irony is brutal, all this preparation for warmth and comfort, but it's going to become a death trap. The chamber looked magnificent though, rich fabrics everywhere, carefully chosen tapestries depicting religious scenes or royal victories. The bed itself was a work of art, draped in silk and velvet, chairs arranged in precise formations. Everything had meaning, everything had protocol. But underneath all that beauty was this cold political calculation. This room wasn't designed for the mother's comfort. It was designed to accommodate an audience, a very large, very important, very invasive audience. Then came the waiting. Days, sometimes weeks of the Queen in this closed-off world, feeling every contraction, every false alarm, her attendants watching her constantly, physicians checking on her, everyone on high alert, because when labour started, well, that's when things got completely out of control. The anticipation in the palace was insane. Courtiers lingering in hallways, servants whispering, messengers ready to run. Everyone knew that call was coming, the Queen is going to give birth. And when that announcement finally echoed through Versailles, chaos. Absolute chaos. Picture this. You're in excruciating labour pain, and suddenly your bedroom door flies open. Not for doctors or midwives, for hundreds of strangers. Courtiers, ministers, nobles, random officials, all of them flooding into your most private moment. Marie Antoinette experienced this firsthand in 1778. Over 200 people crammed into that carefully prepared chamber, people literally climbing on furniture to get a better view. The scene was suffocating, and I mean that literally. Remember those heavy tapestries, those sealed windows, the roaring fireplace to keep everything warm. Now add 200 human bodies, all breathing the same air, generating heat, pushing and shoving to see. Witnesses described courtiers standing on chairs, mounting tables, pressing forward like they were at some twisted sporting event. The air became thick, almost unbreathable, but nobody could leave. This was their job. This was why they were there. Think about what the Queen was experiencing. She's in the most vulnerable moment of her life, in tremendous physical pain, and she's performing for a crowd. Every scream, every contraction, every drop of blood, all of it witnessed by people who would gossip about it later. Did she bear the pain well? Did she maintain royal dignity? Was she taking too long? These weren't medical professionals. These were politicians and courtiers treating childbirth like theatre, like entertainment. The atmosphere in that room must have been unbearable. Eager faces pressed close, whispers filling the air, the stench of unwashed bodies mixed with perfume and smoke from the fireplace. Everyone waiting for that crucial moment when they could verify, yes, a baby actually emerged from this Queen's body. No substitution, no deception, no warming pan tricks. Just raw human biology on display for political purposes. The Queen's most intimate experience became public property. What makes this even more disturbing is how normal it was. This wasn't some one-time traumatic event. This was standard protocol. King Louis XIV had institutionalized it. Every French queen, every princess of the blood, had to endure this. And they knew it was coming their entire lives. Imagine growing up knowing that someday your most painful, vulnerable moment would be a public spectacle, that your screams would echo in front of strangers. That's the reality these women faced. It's such a stark contrast to how we think about childbirth now. We fight for privacy, for quiet rooms, for just the people we choose to be there. But royal women got none of that. Their bodies belonged to the state, their reproduction was a matter of national security, and their pain was public property. This wasn't medieval barbarism, this continued into the 18th century. Marie Antoinette nearly died because of it, and still the practice continued, because politics trumped humanity every single time. Courtly chaos and near tragedy. December 19th, 1778, Versailles. Marie Antoinette is about to give birth to her first child after 8 years of marriage. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. She's not in some quiet room with a doctor and maybe her husband. She's got over 200 people crammed into her bedchamber, courtiers climbing on furniture to get a better view, the air so thick you can barely breathe. And what happens next? She nearly dies from oxygen deprivation, while everyone just watches. Picture this scene. Word spreads through Versailles. The Queen is in labour. Immediately, nobles start flooding toward her chambers. Ministers of state, random courtiers, anyone with enough rank to claim they need to witness this. Why? Because royal births weren't private family moments. They were state events. Every heir needed witnesses to prove legitimacy. So Marie Antoinette, in the most vulnerable moment of her life, becomes the star of a grotesque theatre production. 200 strangers about to watch her scream. The birthing chamber was already stifling. Heavy tapestries covered every window to keep the room warm. The fireplace blazed. Then 200 bodies packed inside, all breathing the same air, generating heat. An eyewitness wrote, "The press was so great. The Queen was in danger of her life. People literally climbing on chairs and tables to see better. The Princess de Lamballe had to stand on furniture just to get air. Imagine being in labour while people fight for better viewing angles of your agony." Marie Antoinette laboured for hours in this suffocating circus. Every contraction watched, every scream analysed by courtiers who'd gossip about her performance later. She's 23 years old, terrified, in excruciating pain, and putting on a show. The Queen can't be weak, can't take too long, can't scream too much. Royal dignity demands she suffer beautifully, while strangers debate whether she's handling childbirth properly. The pressure is inhuman, and the oxygen in that sealed room is running out fast. Finally, the baby emerges. A girl, Marie Therese. The crowd pushes forward to verify what they've witnessed. The midwife holds up the infant. Proof of legitimacy for 200 sets of eyes. But something's wrong. The Queen isn't moving. Her face is purple. Her jaw is clenched. Marie Antoinette has collapsed immediately after delivery, her body starved of oxygen from breathing the same depleted air as hundreds of spectators. To the horrified crowd, she looks dead. The celebration turns to panic in seconds. Chaos erupts. Courtiers start screaming. People rush toward the unconscious Queen. The physicians can't even get close because of the crowd. Marie Antoinette lies there, motionless, her newborn daughter crying somewhere in the mayhem. This is the nightmare scenario. The Queen dying in front of hundreds of witnesses, right after producing an heir. The same political system that demanded this public spectacle has now created a medical emergency, and everyone's just standing there, uselessly panicking. King Louis XVI goes absolutely wild. His wife appears dead, his newborn daughter is screaming, and 200 courtiers are having hysterics in his face. So he does something desperate and brilliant. He starts smashing the windows with his bare hands, glass cutting his palms, blood everywhere. But cold December air finally rushes into that suffocating death trap of a room. The king, who's usually indecisive about everything, becomes a man of action when his wife's life hangs in the balance. Sometimes crisis reveals character. Fresh air floods the chamber, but Marie Antoinette still isn't responding. The royal physicians spring into action with 18th century emergency medicine. Boiling water for her feet, the theory being that heat will draw blood away from her head. Immediate bloodletting to restore her body's balance. Smelling salts waved under her nose, rough massaging to stimulate circulation. These methods sound barbaric now, but they're genuinely trying to save her life. The Queen of France cannot die like this, not in front of everyone. Slowly, Marie Antoinette starts breathing normally. Her colour returns, her eyes flutter open. She's alive. The relief in that room must have been overwhelming. But here's the crazy part. She's been unconscious so long, she has no idea what happened, doesn't know the sex of her baby, doesn't remember the delivery. For over an hour after giving birth, the Queen of France doesn't even know she has a daughter. She'd missed the most important moment of her motherhood because the system nearly killed her. When Marie Antoinette finally learns she has a daughter, the news is bittersweet. She's alive, the baby's healthy, but she's failed in her primary royal duty, producing a male heir. Still, she's grateful to be breathing. The trauma of nearly dying while 200 people watched changes everything. She'll have 3 more children, but Louis XVI immediately changes the birthing protocol. Future deliveries will have witnesses, but maybe a dozen trusted officials, instead of hundreds of random courtiers. Even absolute monarchs can learn from near disasters. This whole nightmare shows how completely royal women's bodies belong to the state. Marie Antoinette nearly died because political tradition mattered more than medical safety. Her most intimate, vulnerable moment became public theatre. Yet despite the trauma, despite nearly losing his wife to stupid protocol, Louis XVI still kept the witness requirement for future births. Just fewer witnesses. The system was too powerful to abandon completely. Royal reproduction remained a public performance until the 20th century. Some traditions die harder than the women forced to endure them. Across the Channel, witnessed births in English royalty. So the French had their chaos. 200 people crammed into Marie Antoinette's room, climbing on furniture. But the English, they thought they were more civilized about it. Wrong. Queen Charlotte, wife of King George III, learned this the hard way in 1762, when she went into labour with her first child, the future George IV, her birthing chamber filled with ministers of state, archbishops, members of the Privy Council, all there to witness her most vulnerable moment. Picture this: August 12th, 1762. Charlotte's been queen for exactly 1 year. She's 17 years old, barely speaks English yet, and now she's about to give birth while a room full of old men in wigs watch her every contraction. The Archbishop of Canterbury stands near her bed. The Prime Minister hovers nearby. These weren't medical professionals. They were politicians. Their job, make sure this baby actually came out of the Queen's body. No switches, no deception, just pure witnessed agony. The English had learned from history. Back in 1688, rumours destroyed King James II. His wife Mary of Modena gave birth to a son, but Protestant nobles immediately claimed the baby was fake, smuggled in through a warming pan. They said these weren't random conspiracy theories. These rumours helped trigger the Glorious Revolution that same year. James II lost his throne. His son spent his life fighting for a crown many believed wasn't rightfully his, all because people doubted what they'd witnessed. So when Charlotte went into labour, everyone knew the stakes. This wasn't just about a baby being born. This was about preventing civil war. The witnesses had specific roles. They watched for any sign of deception. They verified the baby emerged from Charlotte's body. They confirmed it was alive and healthy. Then they signed official documents. Think about that. Grown men whose job was to stare at a teenage girl giving birth, and then write reports about her body. The English approach was supposedly more refined than the French method. Fewer people, more organised, but refined is relative when you're talking about strangers watching you bleed. Charlotte's room had maybe 20 witnesses instead of 200. They stood further back from the bed. Some couldn't see everything clearly, but they could hear her screams. They could smell the blood, and they all took mental notes they'd gossip about for years. More civilized, barely. These women weren't just enduring physical pain, They were performing for an audience that would judge every aspect of their behaviour. Did Charlotte scream too much? Not royal enough? Did she take too long to deliver? Weakness. Was the baby healthy? Good bloodlines. Was it a boy? She'd done her duty. Was it a girl? She'd failed her primary purpose. Every contraction became a political statement. Every groan became tomorrow's gossip. The personal sacrifice was staggering. Your most private moment made completely public. The scrutiny didn't end with birth. These witnesses would spend years discussing what they'd seen, how Charlotte had handled the pain. Whether she'd been brave enough, quiet enough, dignified enough. Court ladies would whisper about her stamina. Ministers would speculate about future pregnancies. The king himself would hear reports about his wife's performance in labour. Imagine your husband learning about your childbirth experience, not from you, but from political officials who'd filed written reports about your body. Charlotte gave birth 15 times, 15 witness deliveries, each one a public performance. By her later pregnancies, the protocol had relaxed slightly, but witnesses remained. She delivered her youngest child, Princess Amelia, in 1783, with ministers still present, 21 years of public births, of performing maternal duty while crowds watched, of never having a private moment with her newborn babies, because official verification came first. The woman practically lived her reproductive life on stage. The psychological damage was brutal. Letters from royal women of this era reveal the terror they felt approaching childbirth. Not just fear of death, though that was real enough. Fear of public failure, of not meeting expectations while in agony. Elisabeth Charlotte, Duchess of Orleans, wrote that she'd rather die than give birth before so many people. They judged everything, your screams, your blood, your body's most intimate functions, all fair game for political analysis and court gossip. These witnessed births shaped how the public saw queens. They weren't mysterious figures anymore. Everyone knew intimate details about their bodies, their pain tolerance, their reproductive capability. Charlotte became known for her stoic deliveries. This enhanced her reputation as a strong queen. But other royal women weren't so lucky. Queens who struggled in labour faced whispers about their fitness to rule, their public image forever tied to how they'd performed in their most vulnerable moments. Childbirth as character assessment. The practice finally ended in Britain in 1948. King George VI simply refused to continue it before Prince Charles was born. Common sense prevailed, only took until the mid-20th century. These royal women had endured centuries of public births, so their subjects could sleep soundly, knowing the succession was legitimate. Their sacrifice prevented wars, maintained stability, but at what cost? Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, remember Charlotte and countless others who couldn't even give birth in peace. Sweet dreams. A cradle of suspicion. The warming pan baby. June 10th, 1688. Windsor Castle. Queen Mary of Modena is about to give birth to what should be the most important baby in English history. Over 40 witnesses pack into her chamber. The king himself, nobles, ministers, officials, everyone who matters is watching. And yet, within hours of this birth, half of Protestant England will be screaming that it's all a lie, that the baby they just witnessed being born is actually an imposter. A fake heir smuggled into the room in a brass warming pan. This isn't some medieval superstition we're talking about. This is 1688, the age of reason, of science, of careful documentation. But here's the thing about witnessed births. They were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of controversy. The whole point was that with dozens of reliable witnesses present, nobody could ever question what happened, except they did question it. Loudly, and these rumours didn't just fade away, they helped topple a king and reshape English history. Sometimes having witnesses isn't enough when people don't want to believe what they saw. Let's set the scene. James II has been king for 3 years. He's Catholic. England is officially Protestant. His heir apparent? His Protestant daughter Mary from his first marriage. Most people can live with that arrangement until Mary of Modena, his Catholic second wife, gets pregnant. If she has a boy, that changes everything. A Catholic dynasty. That's exactly what Protestant England has been dreading since Henry VIII broke with Rome. The stakes couldn't be higher. Every kick in the Queen's belly is a potential political earthquake. The birth happens at St. James's Palace, not Windsor, my mistake earlier. June 10th, around 10 in the morning. The witnesses aren't just random courtiers. We're talking about the Archbishop of Canterbury, multiple earls, the Lord Chancellor, foreign ambassadors. The Queen's own mother is there. The midwife, Mrs. Wilkins, delivers the baby. It's a boy, Prince James Francis Edward Stuart. The King is ecstatic. He's got his male Catholic heir. But here's where everything goes sideways. The bed curtains were partially closed during the actual delivery. Those closed curtains become the foundation for the most explosive conspiracy theory in English history. Protestant pamphleteers start spreading this story. The real baby was stillborn or died immediately. The midwife quickly substituted a living infant that had been secretly brought into the room. How, hidden in a warming pan, those big brass containers used to warm beds. The theory goes that an accomplice slipped the fake baby to the midwife during the chaos of delivery. When witnesses saw her hold up a healthy boy, they were seeing the imposter, not the Queen's actual child. Now, this sounds ridiculous, right? Except, look at the political situation. Protestant nobles are terrified. A Catholic heir means Catholic rule for generations. They need this birth to be illegitimate. They need it desperately. And while warming pans were real things, large enough to theoretically hide a newborn, the timing would be impossible. The logistics make no sense. But conspiracy theories don't need to make sense. They just need to give people permission to believe what they already want to believe. And Protestant England really wanted to believe this baby was fake. The testimonies from witnesses get recorded, published, analysed. Some claim they saw the baby emerge from the Queen's body. Others admit they only heard sounds, saw the midwife hold up the child afterward. The Earl of Clarendon swears he witnessed everything clearly. Other nobles hedge their statements. I was present, but the curtains. I heard the Queen cry out, but couldn't see. Each vague testimony feeds more doubt. Even with 40 witnesses, nobody can provide the crystal clear, undeniable proof that Protestant England would accept, because they don't want to accept it. James II realises his throne is in serious trouble. He orders official investigations, demands detailed sworn statements from every witness. He even has his wife examined by Protestant physicians to confirm she actually gave birth. But it's too late. The narrative has taken hold. Secret pamphlets flood London streets. The warming pan plot discovered. How England was deceived. The more James tries to prove his son's legitimacy, the more guilty he looks. You know how it is when you're desperately defending yourself against accusations. People start wondering why you're protesting so much. By November 1688, Protestant nobles invite William of Orange to invade England and claim the throne in his wife Mary's name. She's James's Protestant daughter, remember. The warming pan baby becomes one of their main justifications. We're not committing treason. We're preventing a Catholic impostor from stealing the crown. William lands with his army. James's support collapses almost immediately. Nobody wants to die defending a king whose heir might be fake. The Glorious Revolution succeeds in weeks, not months. James flees to France. The baby's legitimacy just toppled a kingdom. James Francis Edward Stuart, the warming pan baby, spends his entire life fighting to reclaim what he believes is his throne. He becomes the old pretender, leader of the Jacobite cause. His son, Bonnie Prince Charlie, will lead the failed 1745 uprising. Generations of Stuarts die in exile, always claiming legitimacy, always branded as impostors. Whether he was really James II's son or not, and he almost certainly was, the doubt planted in June 1688 destroyed his life before it began. Sometimes the most damaging lies are the ones that can never be completely disproven. This whole disaster reveals the fatal flaw in witnessed births. They were supposed to prevent succession crises by providing undeniable proof. But witnesses see what they expect to see, remember what supports their interests, testify to protect their futures. You can pack a room with 40 people and still not satisfy those determined to doubt. The warming pan baby scandal shows that sometimes the presence of witnesses creates more suspicion than their absence would have. Human testimony, even from dozens of sources, can't overcome political desperation. The system designed to ensure legitimacy instead destroyed it completely. Pyrrhic victory. Mothers in the royal sphere. Picture this. You're a queen of France, writhing in labour pains while 200 strangers watch your every scream. Not doctors, courtiers, nobles climbing on furniture to get a better view. Your body belongs to the state now. Your womb is public property. Your pain, entertainment. This was the reality for royal women across Europe. Elisabeth Charlotte, Duchess of Orleans, said she'd rather die than endure another witnessed birth. Catherine de' Medici suffered through multiple public deliveries, desperately trying to produce surviving sons, while courtiers speculated about her fertility. Queen Mary of Modena's birth sparked revolution rumours. These women paid an emotional price we can barely imagine. Elisabeth Charlotte wrote letters that still break your heart today. She described giving birth as performing like a circus animal, while nobles counted her contractions and judged whether she screamed with proper royal dignity. The humiliation went beyond the physical pain. Every grunt, every tear, every moment of weakness became gossip material for months afterward. She wrote, "To know they are watching you suffer, discussing your body as if you were livestock, I would choose death." But death wasn't an option. She had duties, obligations, the throne required heirs, and her body was the only way to produce them. Privacy was a luxury queens couldn't afford. The psychological torture was systematic. These weren't accidents or medieval remnants. This was deliberate policy designed by King Louis XIV himself. He wanted witnesses to prevent succession disputes, but for the women enduring it, pure nightmare fuel. Imagine pushing a human being out of your body while strangers evaluate your performance. Too much screaming meant you lacked dignity. Too little meant you weren't really in labour. Too long meant incompetence. Girl instead of boy meant failure. Every birth became a public examination where you could fail spectacularly, and if you did fail, well, the king might need to consider other options for producing heirs. Catherine de' Medici endured this hell repeatedly throughout the 1540s and 1550s. 10 pregnancies, multiple miscarriages, babies who died in infancy. Each loss happened under public scrutiny. Courtiers would immediately start whispering about whether she was cursed, whether the king should find a more fertile wife. Between births, she faced constant questioning about her cycle, her health, her bedroom activities. Personal physicians gave updates to ministers. Her monthly bleeding was state business. When she finally produced surviving sons, the relief was temporary, because then came the pressure for backups. Spares. The dynasty needed insurance policies, and she was the only factory that could produce them. Queen Mary of Modena's 1688 birth triggered actual revolution, not because the birth went badly, but because Protestant nobles refused to believe the baby was real. They claimed it was an impostor smuggled in with a warming pan. Despite over 40 witnesses present, including the king himself, rumours spread like wildfire. The baby was legitimate, the witnesses were credible. Didn't matter, political opponents needed doubt, so they created it. Mary watched her son spend his entire life fighting for a crown. Many believed he had no right to claim. Her body had produced the heir, the witnesses had verified it, but politics trumped reality. The emotional devastation of having your child's legitimacy questioned publicly, unimaginable. The humiliation extended far beyond the delivery room. These women couldn't even recover in private. For weeks after birth, they remained on display during what was called lying in. Visitors came to inspect the mother and baby like museum exhibits. They analysed the queen's complexion, her mood, her milk production. Everything became public information. If she seemed sad, courtiers speculated about postpartum melancholy affecting her ability to nurture future heirs. If she appeared too happy, maybe she wasn't taking her royal duties seriously enough. There was no winning. Every emotion, every physical response, every moment of vulnerability became material for court gossip and political calculation. Recovery required performing wellness, not experiencing it. The pressure to produce male heirs consumed these women's entire existence. A queen's worth was measured exclusively by her womb's output. Daughters were disappointments, sons were victories. But even successful births brought temporary relief. The dynasty needed spares, backups, insurance policies against childhood diseases and accidents. So the cycle continued. Pregnancy, public birth, recovery performance, pregnancy again. Some queens spent decades trapped in this cycle. Their bodies belonged to the state. Their reproductive systems were national resources. Personal desires, health concerns, emotional needs, irrelevant. The crown required heirs, and queens were hired to provide them. Failure meant replacement. Success meant repetition. Either way, their humanity disappeared into their biological function. But here's what gets me about these women. They found ways to survive emotionally. Elisabeth Charlotte developed a sharp wit that cut through court pretension. Her letters reveal someone who refused to let trauma define her. Catherine de' Medici became one of history's most politically shrewd queens, channeling her pain into power. Queen Mary of Modena maintained her dignity even when revolution tore her family apart. They couldn't control the circumstances forced upon them, but they could control their responses. Resilience became rebellion. Surviving with sanity intact was victory. They discovered that even when your body belongs to the state, your mind can remain your own. That's not nothing, that's everything. The price they paid for political stability was staggering. Their trauma prevented succession wars that could kill thousands. Their humiliation maintained legitimacy that kept kingdoms functioning. From the state's perspective, this trade-off made perfect sense. Individual suffering weighed against national chaos. Easy calculation, but for the women living it, the cost was measured in nightmares, anxiety, depression, and lost sense of self. They sacrificed their humanity for stability they'd never personally enjoy. The kingdoms they bled for often discarded them when their wombs stopped producing results. Marie Antoinette nearly died providing France with an heir. France executed her anyway. The stability was temporary, their trauma was permanent. What strikes me most is their quiet strength in impossible circumstances. These weren't weak women crying into their pillows. They were brilliant, complex human beings, trapped in an inhuman system. They found ways to maintain dignity while being treated like livestock. They discovered love for children born under traumatic circumstances. They built relationships despite being surrounded by people who saw them as political instruments rather than people. Their letters reveal humor, intelligence, deep emotional lives that persisted despite everything designed to crush them. They were more than their wombs, more than their function, more than their suffering. They were whole people who refused to disappear completely, even when the system demanded it. Tonight, as you fall asleep in privacy, these queens never knew. Remember their resilience. They endured public humiliation during their most vulnerable moments, and somehow emerged with their sanity intact. They were treated like breeding animals and maintained their humanity anyway. They suffered for stability that often collapsed within their lifetimes. Yet they kept going. They found joy in small moments, love in difficult relationships, strength in impossible situations. Their Pyrrhic victories weren't really victories at all, except for this: they survived. They persisted. They refused to be broken completely. In a system designed to erase them as people, they remained gloriously, stubbornly human. Rest well knowing their strength lives on. The dawn of unveiling. Change is coming. December 19th, 1778. Marie Antoinette nearly dies in a room packed with 200 people. King Louis XVI smashes windows with his bare hands, desperate to save his wife. And in that moment, something breaks. Not just the glass, the whole system. Because when you watch someone you love almost die because of tradition, you start questioning that tradition. The Enlightenment era was already whispering new ideas about privacy, dignity, the rights of individuals, but it took that traumatic birth to finally crack open centuries of brutal protocol. Here's what made the 1770s different. Enlightenment philosophers were writing about natural rights, personal dignity, the idea that maybe, just maybe, people deserved privacy during their most vulnerable moments. Voltaire questioned everything. Rousseau wrote about natural human states. These weren't just academic discussions. These ideas were spreading through the salons, the coffee houses, even the courts. Educated nobles were reading about individual rights and thinking, wait, why exactly do 200 people need to watch a woman give birth? The logic was cracking. Louis XVI had seen his wife's face turn purple, had watched her collapse, seemingly dead, while courtiers trampled each other for better views. The king, who'd been raised to value tradition above all else, suddenly had a choice: follow protocol and risk losing Marie Antoinette to the next birth, or break with centuries of practice. It wasn't even close. 3 years later, when she went into labour with the future Louis XVII, everything changed. Still witnesses, but maybe 12 trusted officials instead of 200 random courtiers climbing on furniture. The changes were immediate and dramatic. Instead of throwing open the doors to anyone with court access, Louis XVI hand-picked witnesses. The room wasn't sealed shut anymore. Windows could be opened for air. The fire wasn't blazing to accommodate hundreds of bodies. Marie Antoinette's subsequent births in 1781, 1785 and 1786 were still witnessed, but they were almost civilized. She didn't collapse from oxygen deprivation. She knew immediately what sex her babies were. Small changes, but revolutionary for someone who'd nearly died from tradition. Other courts were watching. When word spread that the French Queen's births had become more private, and she'd survived them easily, people started asking uncomfortable questions. Why exactly did we need massive crowds? What were we actually protecting against? The answers were starting to sound outdated. In England, Queen Charlotte's later births had fewer witnesses. In Austria, reforms were quietly implemented. It wasn't a revolution yet, but cracks were appearing in the system. Common sense was finally getting a hearing against centuries of paranoid protocol. Medical knowledge was advancing too. Doctors were beginning to understand that cleaner, calmer environments led to better outcomes. All those bodies generating heat and using up oxygen, actually dangerous. The risk of infection from unwashed courtiers crowding around, real. Physicians started arguing that witnessed births weren't just inhumane, they were medically irresponsible. When doctors and philosophers agreed that change was needed, even conservative courts had to listen. Science and ethics were finally aligned against tradition. The philosophical arguments were getting stronger too. If kings ruled by divine right, weren't queens also blessed by God? And if God had blessed them, didn't that mean they deserved dignity during childbirth? It sounds obvious now, but this was radical thinking. Some argued that forcing women to perform their most intimate moments in public was actually impious, that it violated Christian principles of modesty and compassion. When religious arguments joined Enlightenment philosophy, the justifications for witnessed birth started crumbling. Of course, traditionalists fought back hard. They pointed to the 1688 James II controversy, reminding everyone what happened when birth witnesses weren't convincing enough. Succession disputes could trigger civil wars, foreign invasions, thousands of deaths. Was a queen's comfort worth risking national stability? These weren't frivolous concerns, but reformers had an answer: better documentation, more careful record keeping, trusted witnesses instead of random crowds. You could verify legitimacy without turning childbirth into theatre, quality over quantity. Change came slowly, unevenly, but it came. Each reformed birth made the old system look more barbaric. When queens gave birth with dignity and still produced legitimate heirs, the fears seemed overblown. Younger nobles, influenced by Enlightenment ideas, started questioning their parents' generation. Why exactly had their mothers endured such trauma? Court physicians, armed with better medical understanding, pushed for reforms. The combination of philosophy, science, and generational change was powerful. Traditional justifications started sounding like excuses. By the 1780s, the changes were becoming normal. Marie Antoinette's births were documented carefully, but conducted with relative privacy. Other European courts followed suit, each finding their own balance between verification and humanity. The massive crowds were gone. The oxygen-depleting sealed rooms were history. Queens still couldn't give birth in complete privacy. That would take another century, but they weren't performing for hundreds of strangers anymore. Progress was happening, one reformed birth at a time. The dawn was breaking on centuries of brutal tradition. Not completely. There would still be witnesses, still be political pressures, still be restrictions common women never faced. But something fundamental had shifted. The idea that royal women deserved basic dignity during childbirth was no longer radical. It was becoming expected. The Enlightenment had planted seeds that were finally sprouting into policy. Marie Antoinette's near death had become the catalyst for change that would eventually free royal women from their most dehumanizing obligation. The future was looking brighter. The Last Witness, tradition that withstood time. 1926, Mayfair, London. The Duchess of York is in labour with her first child. But here's the thing, even in the Jazz Age, with women getting the vote and hemlines rising, one guy still has to sit in the next room. The Home Secretary, Sir William Joynson Hicks, waiting with his pocket watch, ready to verify that yes, a baby actually emerged from the Duchess. This baby would become Queen Elizabeth II. And this moment, it's the beginning of the end for witnessed royal births. Think about how absurd this was becoming. It's 1926. Cars everywhere. Radio broadcasts. Women smoking cigarettes and cutting their hair short. And yet, the British government still doesn't trust a duchess to give birth without official supervision. Sir William sits there, probably reading the Times, while next door a woman goes through labour. He can't see anything, can't verify anything really. He's just there, a living symbol of centuries-old paranoia about royal babies getting switched. The practice had evolved, sure. No more crowds of 200 courtiers climbing on furniture. No more queens collapsing from lack of oxygen while nobles fought for better views. But that core principle remained. Royal births need witnesses, official ones, because heaven forbid a future monarch's legitimacy gets questioned later. The Home Secretary's presence meant the state had verified this birth. This baby belonged to this mother. No warming pan conspiracies, no switched babies, just one very awkward government official waiting in an adjacent room. What's fascinating is how everyone knew this was getting ridiculous. The medical establishment had moved far beyond medieval superstitions about childbirth. Privacy was becoming a fundamental right, not a luxury. Even common mothers in 1926 got more dignity during delivery than the future Queen of England. But traditions die hard, especially traditions tied to the crown. The establishment clung to witnessed births like they were constitutional bedrock. Change? In the monarchy? Absolutely not. Even token change felt dangerous to people who'd spent centuries fearing succession crises. The irony cuts deep. By the 1920s, The monarchy's actual power had shrunk dramatically. Parliament ruled. The king signed papers and waved at crowds. Royal succession barely mattered for governing Britain anymore. But old habits die hard. The same institutions that had stripped away royal political power still demanded ancient protocols around royal bodies. It's like they'd forgotten why witnessed births existed in the first place. The political necessity had vanished. The humiliating tradition remained. Fast forward to 1948. Princess Elizabeth, now married to Philip, is expecting their first child. King George VI makes a quiet decision that changes everything. He tells the government, no more, no Home Secretary required, no official witnesses. His daughter can give birth like every other woman in Britain, privately. Just like that, 300 years of witnessed royal births ended. Not with parliamentary debate or constitutional crisis, just a father protecting his daughter's dignity. Charles was born without any government officials lurking nearby. Why 1948? What finally broke this centuries-old tradition? World War II had changed everything. The royal family had stayed in London during the Blitz. They'd shared rationing with ordinary citizens. Elizabeth herself had served as a mechanic. The mystical separation between royals and commoners had cracked. People started asking harder questions about royal privileges, including the privilege of forcing women to endure witnessed births. The war had made privacy feel less like luxury and more like basic human decency. Here's what gets me about this whole evolution. It took until 1948 for royal women to get what peasant women had enjoyed forever, privacy during childbirth. Think about that. For centuries, the more important you were, the less privacy you got. Queens suffered the most invasive births while common mothers laboured in peace. The entire system was backwards. Political importance meant human dignity disappeared. Only when monarchy became largely ceremonial could royal women finally give birth with basic privacy and respect. The end came quietly, because by 1948, witnessed births had lost all practical purpose. No one really believed babies were getting switched anymore. The warming pan conspiracy theories that had justified centuries of invasion, they belonged to a different world. DNA testing was still decades away, but social attitudes had shifted completely. The idea that women would systematically deceive about their pregnancies struck modern people as paranoid and absurd, which honestly, it always had been. We still witness royal births, of course, just differently. When Kate Middleton gave birth to George, William and Louis, crowds gathered outside hospitals, photographers camped for days, the world watched via live television and social media. But the actual delivery? Private, medical staff only. The witnessing became metaphorical rather than literal. We've kept the public fascination with royal reproduction, while finally abandoning the invasive traumatic tradition of forcing women to labour before audiences. Progress, but it took 500 years to get here. 1948 marks the moment royal women finally joined the rest of humanity. They could scream in private, bleed in private, fear for their lives in private. The state no longer owned their wombs, their pain, or their most vulnerable moments. It's a small victory in the grand scheme of history, but for women like Marie Antoinette, who nearly died gasping for air while 200 people watched her deliver, it would have meant everything. Sometimes the most important revolutions happen quietly, in hospital rooms, when fathers simply say no more. From courtyard to crib, the legacy of silent spectacles. Here's something wild. It took until 1948 for royal women to get the same privacy in childbirth that peasant women had always enjoyed. Think about that. For centuries, queens endured their most vulnerable moments as public theatre, while their servants could labour in peace. When King George VI finally said enough and ended the practice of witnessed royal births, he wasn't just changing protocol, he was acknowledging something we'd forgotten, that being royal doesn't make you less human. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Even after Marie Antoinette nearly died in front of 200 witnesses, even after the obvious cruelty became undeniable, the tradition limped on for another century and a half. Why? Because admitting the practice was wrong meant admitting that generations of queens had suffered unnecessarily. It meant confronting the fact that political paranoia had trumped basic human decency. Sometimes change takes time, not because people don't know better, but because knowing better forces uncomfortable truths about what came before. What strikes me most about this whole story is how it exposes the fundamental lie at the heart of absolute monarchy. Kings claimed divine right, insisted they were chosen by God, elevated above ordinary mortals. But when succession was at stake, when legitimacy needed proving, they revealed their true fear that people might discover they were just human after all. The witness births weren't really about preventing fraud. They were about maintaining the illusion of royal specialness while simultaneously treating royal women like livestock at auction. The irony runs deeper. These elaborate public spectacles were supposed to prevent rumours and establish legitimacy beyond doubt, but they actually created more suspicion, not less. James II's son was born in front of 40 witnesses, and people still claimed he was smuggled in. Marie Antoinette delivered before hundreds, and conspiracy theories followed her to the guillotine. All that suffering, all that humiliation, and it didn't even work. The witness births satisfied no one except the voyeuristic appetites of courtiers who climbed furniture for better views. When I think about Elisabeth Charlotte writing, "I would rather have died than give birth before so many people," I wonder how many queens felt the same way but couldn't say it. How many suffered in silence because expressing their trauma might seem like criticizing the system that gave them their crown. The psychological damage went far beyond the physical ordeal. These women had to smile and accept congratulations from the same people who had watched them scream and bleed. They had to pretend gratitude for an experience that was essentially sanctioned assault. The end of witness births coincided with something else: the gradual recognition that women, even royal women, had interior lives that mattered. The Enlightenment brought new ideas about individual dignity, about the right to privacy, about the difference between public duty and personal violation. It wasn't a coincidence that these practices ended as constitutional monarchy replaced absolute rule. When kings stopped claiming to own their subjects' bodies, they also stopped claiming to own their queens' most intimate experiences. But let's be honest, we haven't completely moved past this mentality. Modern royal births still attract crowds outside hospitals. Photographers camp for days waiting for a glimpse of the new baby. Social media explodes with speculation about due dates, gender reveals, names. We've moved the voyeurism from inside the birthing room to outside the hospital, from literal witnesses to metaphorical ones. The fascination with royal reproduction continues, just with better boundaries and less immediate physical danger for the mother. What this history teaches us is how easily political expediency can override basic human compassion. The witnessed births weren't the product of evil individuals, but of a system that prioritized abstract concepts, like legitimacy, over concrete human suffering. Everyone involved, kings, courtiers, physicians, even the queens themselves, accepted the practice because it served larger purposes. That's the scary part. How normal cruelty can become when it's institutionalized, formalized, wrapped in tradition, and called necessary. The queens who endured this system weren't just victims, though. They were also complicit in perpetuating it. Marie Antoinette, despite her own trauma, still required witnesses for her later births. They understood that their suffering upheld the monarchy that gave meaning to their lives. Breaking the system meant questioning their own identity, their children's legitimacy, the entire structure of power that defined them. Sometimes people cling to harmful traditions, not because they don't recognize the harm, but because change feels more threatening than suffering. Looking back, the witnessed birth tradition reveals something profound about how societies balance collective security against individual dignity. The fear of succession crises was real. Civil wars did kill thousands, but the response, traumatizing women in labour, shows how easily societies choose the wrong solutions to real problems. We see this pattern throughout history, real threats leading to disproportionate measures that harm the innocent while failing to address underlying issues, the cure becoming worse than the disease it was meant to prevent. As you drift off tonight, consider this. Privacy in our most vulnerable moments isn't just a luxury, it's a fundamental recognition of our humanity. For centuries, royal women sacrificed that privacy for political stability, enduring public humiliation, so kingdoms wouldn't collapse into chaos. Their suffering brought us lessons about the cost of putting abstract principles above human dignity. We owe it to their memory to remember what they endured, and to never again mistake surveillance for security, or public spectacle for public good. Sweet dreams.